Good evening, this is Shindo. Tonight I am going to be discussing a man by the name of Aleksandr Dugin. He's a very interesting man. He is a confidant of Putin in Russia, if you haven't heard of him. And I have an article here from the National Review. He has gotten into the news lately thanks to Trump raising up the whole question of the Russians and their espionage work, whether meant sarcastically or not. Dugin, this man Aleksandr Dugin, has gotten a little bit of interest by the media. You may not have heard of him, and that's perfectly understandable. And I am going to read this article from the National Review, which doesn't depict this man in a very good light. He is basically anti-United States, anti-establishment, and he is working, or at least the claim is that he is working to cause chaos within the United States and possibly even a civil war. And he is one of Putin's right-hand man. So let's get straight to the article. The name of this article from the National Review, and I will give you a link to it, is Dugin's Evil Theology. Please forgive me again for mangling now Russian names, but, well, I am an English speaker, so. To the article. His Eurasianism is a satanic cult. Men of action cut a large figure in the history books, but it is the ideas placed in their heads by men of thought that actually determine what they do. Thus, the scribblings of mad philosophers can lead to the deaths of millions. As the modern-day heir to this tradition, Aleksandr Dugin bids fair to break the record. Most Americans don't know anything about Aleksandr Dugin. They need to, because Dugin is the mad philosopher who is redesigning the brains of much of the Russian government and public, filling their minds with new hate-ridden totalitarian ideology whose consequences can only be catastrophic in the extreme, not only for Russia, but for the entire human race. In recent months, as the embrace of Duginist ideas by the Putin regime had become ever more evident, a number of articles have been written calling attention to the threat. But now, with the appearance of, quote, the American empire should be destroyed, unquote, Aleksandr Dugin and the perils of Elementalized Eschatology, that is a book name, by James Heister, we finally have a book-length treatment. It is well worth reading. Heister is a bishop of the Lutheran Church, and accordingly has dealt with both the political and theological aspects of Dugin's allegedly conservative, but actually neo-paganism, Eurasianist ideology. Yes, this person, I'm off the article. This person is of extreme interest to me and Lucy, as you might understand as I read more and more about this man. Now, I'm not going to spell it out for you why Lucy and I would be interested in this man, but if you know us and if you know our channel, then I think you'll know why we find interest in him. And anybody who's a bishop of the Lutheran Church who speaks out against him, well, that only puts icing on the cake as far as I'm concerned. Back to the article. The subtitle of the book may put off a number of readers, but a plain-spoken engineer who would cross the street to avoid terms like immentalized eschatology, quote unquote, I found the writings to be clear enough overall, and in some places elegant. Heister follows Dugin's career, moving from his expulsion from the Moscow Aviation Institute for involvement in proto-Nazi mystical circles in the early 1980s through his continued development in association with various Thule societies like organizations through the late 80s. His contacts with anti-democratic European Nouvelle Droite, his co-founding and career with the National Bolshevik Party in the 1990s, and his subsequent move into the Russian political mainstream following his realization that he could gain far more influence as an advisor to those in power than he could ever operate as a splinter party of his own. An aside here of my own, the reason I heard about this guy is because apparently they're starting to say that he has influence over this election and over Donald Trump specifically. Heister then proceeds to dissect Dugin's political and geopolitical ideology of Eurasianism, the core idea that the, quote, liberalism, by which Dugin means the entire Western consensus, represents an assault on the traditional hierarchical organization of the world, repeating the ideas of Nazi theorist Karl Haushofer, Rudolf Hess, Carl Schmitt, and Arthur Muller van den Broek. Dugin says that this liberal threat is not new, but is the ideology of the maritime cosmopolitan power, quote, Atlantis, unquote, which has conspired to subvert more conservative land-based societies since ancient times. Accordingly, he has written books in which he has reconstructed the entire history of the world's continuous battle between two factions, from Rome versus Carthage to Russia versus the Anglo-Saxon, quote, Atlantic Order, unquote, today. If it is to win its fight against the subversive oceanic barriers, such as, quote, racist, because foreign and imposed, ideas as human rights, Russia must unite around itself all the continental powers, including Germany, Central and Eastern Europe, the former Soviet republics, Turkey, Iran, and Korea, into grand Eurasian Union, strong enough to defeat the West. Folks, this is a guy who is giving Putin advice, okay? In order to be so united, quote, from Lisbon to Vladivostok, unquote, the Eurasian Union will need a defining ideology, and for this purpose, Dugin has developed a new, quote, fourth political theory, unquote, combining all the strongest points of communism, Nazism, egoism, and traditionalism, thereby allowing it to appeal to the adherents of all these diverse anti-liberal creeds. He would adopt communism opposition to free enterprise. However, he would drop the Marxist commitment to technological progress, a liberal-derived idea, in favor of ecologism's demagogic appeal to stop the advance of industry and modernity. From traditionalism, he derives a justification for stopping free thought. All the rest is straight-out Nazism, ranging from legal theories justifying unlimited state power and the elimination of individual rights to the needs for populations, quote, rooted, unquote, in the soil, to weird Gnostic ideas about the secret origin of the Aryan race in the North Pole. Folks, this is wild stuff, and these people are in control. of our world. Do you wonder why we're moving closer and closer to World War III? Well, here's one of the reasons. What Russia needs, says Dugin, is a, quote, genuine, true, radical, revolutionary, and consistent fascism, unquote. On the other hand, quote, liberalism is an absolute evil. Only a global crusade against the U.S., the West, globalization, and their political ideological expression, liberalism, is capable of becoming an adequate response. The American empire should be destroyed, unquote. Those are his quotes. Heister then provides a chilling analysis of Dugin's theology. Here's a quote from the book. It would be our contention that Dugin's fusion of traditionalism and Eurasianism has become a, quote, Gnostic mass movement, unquote, of the third type, quote, activist mysticism, unquote. It's not exaggeration to state that Dugin's intended goal, his telos, is the end of the world, and that the accomplishment of that end is dependent, he believes, on the implementation of his ideology. As Dugin has proclaimed in his recent book, the fourth political theory, quote, the end times and the eschatological meaning of politics will not realize themselves on their own. We will wait for the end in vain. The end will never come if we wait for it, and it will never come if we do not. If the fourth political practice is not able to realize the end times, then it would be invalid. The end of days should come, but it will not come by itself. This is a task. It is not a certainty. It is an active metaphysics. It is a practice, unquote. This desire to bring about the end of the world is not a sudden development in Dugin's thought. As noted in the quotation at the beginning of this chapter, as early as 2001, Dugin's intentions were being published abroad and could be read by an English-speaking audience. In 2000, Stephen Shenfield observes that Dugin's eschatological view is Manichaean, quote-unquote, which is to say a dualistic form of Gnosticism which views the world as a battleground of equally matched forces of good and evil, in which spiritual forces of light contend with material forces of evil. Into this Manichaeism, Dugin admixed Christian concepts, oft repeating the notion that the West is the realm of the, quote, Antichrist, unquote, as Sheffield quotes Dugin. Wow. Excuse me. Quote, the meaning of Russia is that through the Russian people will be realized the last thought of God, the thought of the end of the world. Death is the way to immortality. Love will begin when the world ends. We must long for it. Like true Christians, we are uprooting the accursed tree of knowledge. With it will perish the universe, unquote. Wow. Folks, this guy has got the right ear of Putin. Sheffield then observes, quote, Alexander Yanov, quoting these lines, concludes that Dugin's real dream of death, first of all the death of Russia, is his reply. Dugin avoids dealing directly with the substance of Yanov's critique, but observes that he fails to appreciate the positive significance of death, unquote. It is hard to know how to react to someone who claims to want to bring about the end of the world. When the desire is expressed with a thick Russian accent, the hearer is more likely to simply dismiss the speaker as some sort of, quote, supervillain, unquote, from a bad, quote, action-adventure, unquote, movie. It is a claim which evokes the snicker until one realizes the man who thinks that the, quote, meaning of Russia, unquote, is, quote, the end of the world, unquote, is the man whose geopolitical doctrine is being implemented by the ruler of Russia. Heister continues, Dugin is quite keen on the notion that the coming age is the third, the final age. As Dugin wrote in, quote, The Metaphysics of National Bolshevism, unquote, quote, beyond rights and lefts, there is one and indivisible revolution in the dialectical triad, Third Rome, Third Reich, Third International, unquote. The realm of National Bolshevism, Regnum, their empire of the end. This is the perfect accomplishment of the greatest revolution of history, both a continental and universal one. It is the angel's return, hero's resurrection, the heart's uprising against the reason's dictatorship. This last revolution is a concern of the Acephal, the headless bearer of the cross, sickle and hammer, crowned by eternal Son Felfat, unquote. This, quote, emperor of the end, unquote, is marked by the, quote, dialectical triad, unquote, which combines, quote, Third Rome, Third Reich, Third International, unquote. All the expectations of historic Russian messianic delusions combined with Jacobite aims of Nazism and Soviet Bolshevism purportedly find their highest expression in this new ideology, according to Dugin. Finally, Heister comments on Dugin's worship of chaos, an adaptation of the occult symbol of the eight-pointed Star of Chaos as the emblem, in which inscribed in gold on black background the flag of the Russian movement. Quote, for Dugin, logos is replaced by chaos, and the very symbol of chaos magic is the symbol of Eurasia. Quote, logos has expired, and we all will be buried under its ruins unless we make an appeal to chaos and its metaphysical principles and use them as a basis for something new, unquote. Dugin dressed his discussion of logos in the language of Heidegger, but its terminology cannot be read outside of the 2,000-year-old Western biblical tradition, which associates logos with Christ. And Dugin's invocation of chaos against logos leads to a certain inevitable conclusion regarding his doctrine, unquote. In short, Dugin's Gnosticism is a satanic cult. This is the ideology behind the Putin regime, quote, Eurasian Union Project, unquote. It is to this dark program, which threatens not only the prospects for freedom in Ukraine and Russia, but the peace of the world, and that the former Ukrainian president, Viktor Yovanovitch, tries to sell, quote, his country. It is against this program that the courageous protesters in the Maidan took their stand, and with scandalously little help from the West, somehow miraculously prevailed. It is on our behalf of the program that Putin regime has created a bloodbath in eastern Ukraine, which follows Dugin, now in terms, quote, New Russia, unquote. It is on behalf of this program that Dugin, with massive support from the Russian government, has organized a fascist international of European fringe parties, and on behalf of the program that the Quinsings lead these parties are willing to betray their nations to Kremlin domination. Without Ukraine, Dugin's fascist Eurasian Union project is impossible, and sooner or later Russia itself will have to join the West to become free, leaving only a few despised and doomed islands of tyranny around the globe. Not going to happen, folks. Anyway, but the Ukraine underfoot, the Eurasianist program can and will proceed. A new Iron Curtain will fall in place of imprisoning a large fraction of humanity in the grip of monstrous totalitarian powers that would become the arsenal of evil around the world for decades to come. That means another Cold War, trillions of dollars wasted on arms, accelerated growth of national security state and home, repeated proxy conflicts costing millions of lives abroad, and civilization itself placed at risk should a single misstep in the endless, insane, great power game precipitate the locked and loaded confrontation into a thermonuclear exchange. Only this time our Cold War opponents will not be secular communists, but true believers of death-worshipping cult that would like to bring about the end of the world. Every victory for the expansionist program abroad enhances the revisionist power with Russia. As a result, the Western capitulation so far, the Duginite movement is growing exponentially, while the forces of sanity are being cowed and crushed. If Ukraine falls, Vladimir Putin may discover that, like the German generals who empowered Hitler, has fostered the birth of a monster he can no longer control. Maybe you should read Heister's book, too. Whew, what a mouthful. But it should be obvious, folks, why in the world I felt compelled to give you this 20-minute video. And those of you who have actually sat through all of it, I think you know exactly why. You see, I've never heard of the guy until this morning. Dugin, this guy is somebody to reckon with. A chaos magician, folks, which, by the way, I am as well. A chaos magician who has the ear of Putin, who wants to bring about the end of the world. Is this getting through to anyone? Everything that I do, everything that I put out here, I'm trying to get through to people. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Folks, it's not going to end well. And I sure as hell am not on the side of some guy who's in Russia just because he happens to be a chaos magician. I'm not. I'm not on his side. That doesn't mean, however, I don't agree to some extent what he's saying about what's going to happen after all of this shitstorm ends. Folks, pay attention to what's going on. This might be one of the most important videos that I've done in recent memory. So those of you who have made it to this 22-minute mark, good for you. You're paying attention. This information is important. I'm not just spitting into the wind. I hope I'm not. Few of you out there, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder whether I'm just casting my pearls among swine. This is something that needs to be investigated. This man and what's going on in Russia. NATO is building itself up, and Russia is building itself up, and World War III is just around the corner. But, just maybe, there's going to be a peacemaker who's going to come and bring peace between us and Russia. And this man will be heralded as the greatest figure that the world has seen since Jesus Christ. And it is coming, folks. And if that's not evident to you, then quite frankly, you're a fool. This is Shindo. Have a good day.